Okay, here's part 4 of my video on or my talk on the exclusive competence of the individual to decide for herself. And I've gone over the definition of government, definition of society, and I've gone over uh, the direct a priori and definitional consequences for a free society. I didn't look at the chart for the unfree society, but I discussed it in the same as the opposite side of the same coin, and so that you understood. So I gave an analysis for what happens when what are the incentives of government, a monopoly on the initiation of violence, versus the incentives of people where they don't have a monopoly on the initiation of violence, where they have to actually uh, voluntarily receive something from another person in order to uh, uh, in order and give something in exchange for it, rather than the government, which does everything by force and doesn't really discriminate amongst its how it delivers the pretentious or pretentious goods that it delivers to society. It doesn't have to discriminate more than in a political sense, whereas a free society, you have to discriminate exactly what the person wants in order to get what you want. That was strange, the way it did that. Okay, so in this one, we're going to start the actual details. Um, this thing's off a little bit. I wonder why it's off like that. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate with a few useful videos about each area of society that I just talked about in terms of just their logical consequences of the fact that the individual is the exclusive person who can decide for herself. Um, so if I take, oh, say the most difficult arguments for defense. Now I'm not going to play this YouTube because the people who are against no government, the libertarians who are against no government, use an argument called the free rider problem. That's what Peter Schiff does. He says that, well, you couldn't have a defense that was run by private organizations because the people who paid for those, the people who received those benefits would not necessarily have to pay for them. So you would have, they would be free riders, and the thing would not be viable economically. But there's something fishy about what he says in that. But here's the overall problem with that argument. The overall problem is that there are many potential layers of defense of a nation. There are many levels of the way a society can defend itself, ranging all the way from what Gandhi did in India, to not the passive resistance, and what I think a lot of other countries have done, all the way up to actually having pretty powerful private competitive uh, defense forces. And well, really it would start with insurance companies, and it would start with the desire of a business not to invest capital without first guaranteeing that it's not going to be wasted. When we invest in an industrial, in a liberal democracy, we know that it's a liberal democracy, meaning what we had in the United States, especially 100 years ago, 120 years ago. When we invest in that, we know that the government is to protect our property rights as industrialists. And so we invest, or as investors in industry. And when so that's the first line of defense. Because nobody's going to invest in a place where they're not secure from invasion. And but there are several layers in between that. The first is that that's the primary layer is that if you try to insure something for fire, the fire company is going, the insurance company is going to require you have certain requirements before they'll insure you. Otherwise, it costs them too much in terms of their return because there will be too many fires, and so they reduce risk. And the way they do that is they hire defense contractors, just as insurance companies would hire, I don't know, somebody to go in and check the fire, check the fire compliance um, or health. Let's say if you had health insurance, the health company would require you to be healthy because it would save them money in a free society. That's just the way people are. That's just the way life is. That when you invest in something, you watch your investment and you require it to be. If you go into a contract, you have certain requirements in that contract. So that's the first line of defense. And this free rider problem that some people wouldn't bother to get defense insurance, well, that's probably handled culturally. Um, the people could be ostracized. They would be not hired by the company. Because the insurance company would require them to uh, pay something, let's say one company decided to try to get away from not having insurance to save costs from invasion, from military conquest. Then the companies that would have done it would pay for it. I mean, nobody would if they didn't have to, right? But they would tend to leave, and that would create a vulnerable area. And they would tend to go where people were more culturally compliant to that defense culture. Where there was a defense culture, they would go there, and that would force people to develop a defense culture wherever they were. Uh, you know, uh, Maybe wages would be slightly higher where there wasn't a defense culture, but that's a dynamic that doesn't really sustain itself, right? When you become invaded. So the dynamic pressure would be um, to have insurance, to hire for the insurance companies to hire defense agencies, or for you to hire a defense agency and to reduce your uh, your costs of getting insured. The insurance company just sort of auditing the situation. But so that's one layer of defense. And the second layer, the next most effective layer of defense is illustrated by what Admiral Hirohito said in 1939 about when they were discussing in Japan the invasion of the U.S. And he said, "There's no way you could do that." He said there'd be a gun behind every blade of grass. So what I'm speaking about is armed citizenry. I don't. When some of these interviewers after Sandy Hook were on Pierce Morgan's show, and he thought he had them trapped because he said, and he did have those stupid people trapped. When they said, "Well, would you allow somebody to have a tank or a machine gun?" And my answer would be, "Hell yeah." As long as they're not getting it because they want to, murder people. I mean, if you let them have a gun, you can murder people with a gun, but you let them have guns, right? And in fact, when there's more guns, there's less crime. And that's a simple fact. That's just the way the thing works out. And that's the reason it works out that way is because of economics. Because if you're a criminal, you're not stupid, even if you're evil. or if you're insane. You're not stupid. You're not going to go where there are, if you're going to slaughter people, you're not going to go where people might have a concealed weapon. You don't know which one's got a concealed weapon, and he's going to pull it out and pop you, you know. But they go where there's what they call gun-free zones, which are the most dangerous place to be in the world. Where the people are armed, there's very little crime. That's a fact. So, uh, so we have this thing called militias in the Second Amendment, and that can become a cultural tradition as well. And of course, everybody should be armed and well trained in their own weaponry. I myself am not a gun person. I've never owned one or hardly shot one at all. But I'm just talking about economics here, and so that's another level of. I mean, after all, how do we win the Revolutionary War? It's because we had an armed citizenry who volunteered, by the way, to join the army. Washington had to beg them to stay in the army, right? And and by the way, the whole organization by the centralized Continental Congress was a disaster, really. Washington was a shitty general. The first thing he did was get those people captured in Fort Washington, lost about 2,000. They had to spend the rest of the war in a dungeon. Most of them died, probably, on a ship or something. And so the next layer is after armed citizenry, who can easily form with cultural, with the incentives of the whole, connected to even to the defense agencies that would be there. They would have some relationship to that, to the insurance companies. But the militia, the private militia, could also develop as a culture. And it's extremely difficult militarily to invade another country compared to defending your own country. Plus, there's much more incentives. If you have a piece of ground or some property or a business investment in a particular country, you're going to fight like hell. I think the Phoenicians did that. They fought like hell to defend their property back before states were such powerful things. And so I guess they probably did have a Phoenician state. I'm not sure about all that, but as individuals, they fought like hell to protect their property because they were allowed private property. And so then the third layer is, or the fourth layer after, I guess that'd be the third layer, is nonviolent resistance. Nonviolent resistance is very, very costly for the state, for the invading army, and for the controlling government. If nobody cooperates with you, it can be very wearing, as it was on the British. So I don't know about other examples. So those three layers could all work in harmony with each other. I mean, not necessarily that nonviolent people would cooperate with the militias or the defense agencies, but somehow, in a sense, they would be, right? So I don't buy Peter Schiff's argument that I don't buy Peter Schiff's argument that you'd have to have you'd have a free rider problem, because I think life would naturally gravitate towards a culture, a multi-layered culture of resistance to invasion and conquering. Oh, and by the way, here's the fourth reason that I don't believe in that, is that government is 10 times less effective than private enterprise, or 100 times. Depends. I mean, I don't know if it's that kind of a relationship, but private enterprise is incentivized to be nonviolent because violence has no benefit in private enterprise. You can't hold value by conquering people, and also the war. The way you would be defensive in private enterprise would be the